The morning alarm echoed through the metal halls of Nexus Prime Station like thunder rolling across an empty sky. Jake Martinez opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling of his small room. The walls were gray metal, cold and plain like everything else on this massive space station that floated between three different star systems. Outside his small window, he could see other ships coming and going, carrying cadets and supplies to the most important military school in the galaxy. Jake rolled out of his narrow bed and put on his academy uniform. The dark blue fabric felt stiff against his skin, and the golden patches on his shoulders marked him as a first-year cadet. He was 19 years old, average height for a human, with brown hair and dark eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. His face was ordinary, the kind that would disappear in a crowd back on Earth, but here among aliens he stood out simply for being human. The Galactic Military Academy was huge beyond anything Jake had imagined when he first arrived 3 months ago. The main station stretched for miles in every direction, with rotating sections that created artificial gravity and massive training areas where cadets learned to fight in space and on planets. Thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds lived and studied here together, though Jake was beginning to understand that being together did not always mean being equal. Jake walked down the corridor toward the dining hall, passing other cadets who were heading to their morning classes. Most of them were much taller than him. The Zentari cadets stood nearly 8 feet high, their bodies covered in hard crystal-like shells that gleamed under the artificial lights. Their forearms moved with perfect coordination as they talked to each other in voices that sounded like breaking glass. The Valerians floated rather than walked, their pale bodies shimmering as they used their mental powers to move through the air. The Korthic cadets scuttled along on 6 legs, their multiple arms carrying data tablets and weapons with equal ease. Among all these incredible beings, Jake felt very ordinary. Humans were newcomers to this galactic community. Only 50 years ago, Earth had been alone in the universe as far as anyone knew. Then the first alien ships had arrived and everything changed. Now humans were trying to prove they belonged among the stars, but it was not easy when everyone else had been traveling between worlds for thousands of years. The dining hall was enormous, with high ceilings and tables arranged in sections for different species. Each group had their own area because their food needs were so different. The Zentari ate crystals that they ground up with their powerful jaws. The Valerians consumed some kind of glowing liquid that smelled like flowers. The aquatic Madani had special water tanks built into their tables, where they could soak their gills while eating. Jake took his place in the human section, which was much smaller than the others. There were only 12 human cadets in the entire academy, and most of them were older than Jake. They came from different countries on Earth, but here they all stuck together because they shared the same struggles and challenges. Earth food was considered primitive by galactic standards, but Jake was grateful for the familiar taste of bread and protein bars that reminded him of home. During breakfast, Jake listened to the conversations around him. The alien cadets talked about their advanced technology, their family histories that stretched back thousands of years, and their natural abilities that made them perfect warriors. The Zentari could lift weights that would crush a human. The Valerians could read minds and influence thoughts. The Korthic could calculate battle strategies faster than most computers. Every species seemed to have some special gift that made them valuable to the galactic military. Jake wondered what gifts humans might have. So far, he had not discovered anything special about himself or his species. Humans were not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. They did not have natural weapons or armor or psychic powers. What they did have was stubbornness, which the other species seemed to think was more of a weakness than a strength. After breakfast, Jake headed to his first class of the day, which was combat training in the zero-gravity chambers. These were large spherical rooms where the artificial gravity could be turned off, forcing cadets to learn how to fight while floating in space. Most of the alien species had some experience with this because their homeworlds had lower gravity than the station, but Jake had grown up on Earth where gravity was strong and constant. The combat instructor was Commander Veltar, a Zentari warrior. whose crystal shell was marked with scars from real battles. He was ancient by human standards, over 200 years old, but for his species he was still in his prime. His forearms could move independently, allowing him to demonstrate complex fighting techniques that would be impossible for beings with only 2 arms. Commander Veltar paired the cadets for sparring practice. Jake found himself matched against a Korthik named Thixanol, whose 6 legs gave him perfect balance even in zero gravity. The Korthik's 4 arms held practice weapons, while his 2 remaining arms helped him maneuver through the air. Jake held his single practice staff and tried to remember everything he had learned about fighting in weightless conditions. The match began with Thixanol moving like a spider through the air, his weapons creating a web of attacks that came from every direction. Jake tried to block and dodge, but the Korthik's natural advantages were too great. Within minutes, Jake was floating helplessly, with multiple stunning hits marking his defeat. Commander Veltar observed without comment. This was the pattern Jake had experienced since arriving at the academy. He lost most of his fights, struggled with the advanced technology, and often felt like he was swimming upstream against a current too strong for him. But each time he was defeated, Jake studied what had happened and tried to learn from it. He noticed that while he lost the fights, he lasted longer each time and made his opponents work harder for their victories. The other human cadets faced similar challenges. During lunch, they shared their experiences and tried to encourage each other. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, the senior human cadet, reminded them that they were pioneers opening a path for future generations. Every human who proved they could succeed at the academy made it easier for others to follow. Jake spent his afternoon in strategy classes, where cadets learned to command fleets and plan military campaigns across entire star systems. The problems were incredibly complex, involving multiple species with different capabilities, various types of spacecraft, and political considerations that could change the outcome of battles. Jake found these classes fascinating, even though he often felt overwhelmed by the scope of what they were studying. The alien cadets approached these problems with methodical precision, applying rules and strategies that their species had developed over centuries of warfare. They had historical examples to guide them and cultural traditions that shaped their thinking. Jake had no such background to draw from, so he had to rely on his instincts and creativity to find solutions. As the day ended and Jake returned to his small room, he reflected on his time at the academy. He was learning and growing stronger, even if his progress was not as obvious as that of his alien classmates. He had come here to prove that humans belonged among the stars, and he was determined to succeed no matter how long it took or how many defeats he had to endure along the way. Zorath Velthara stood at the observation deck of his luxury quarters, looking out at the stars that had belonged to his family for over 3,000 years. His crystalline body caught the light from distant suns and scattered it across the polished walls of his room. Everything around him spoke of wealth and power, from the ancient weapons mounted on display to the rare minerals that decorated his personal space. He was not just any Zentari cadet, he was nobility, born into a bloodline that had helped create the Galactic Alliance itself. The quarters assigned to Zorath were 3 times larger than those given to ordinary cadets. His family's influence had ensured that he received the best of everything at the academy. While other students shared cramped rooms and basic facilities, Zorath enjoyed private training areas, personal tutors, and access to advanced equipment that most cadets would never see. His crystal shell gleamed with perfect health and nutrition. Fed on the finest crystal compounds that money could buy, Zorath's morning routine was a carefully planned series of activities designed to maintain his physical and mental superiority. He began each day with meditation exercises that sharpened his 4-part consciousness, allowing him to think with each of his arms independently while maintaining central control. His breakfast consisted of rare crystals imported directly from his homeworld, each one carefully selected to enhance different aspects of his natural abilities. After his meal, Zorath reviewed combat recordings from the previous day's training sessions. His compound eyes could process multiple video streams simultaneously, analyzing the fighting techniques of other cadets and identifying weaknesses he could exploit. He paid particular attention to the performance of species he had never fought before. Building detailed mental databases of their capabilities and limitations, the Zentari noble was accompanied everywhere by his carefully chosen circle of elite companions. Kixara was a Valerian princess whose telepathic abilities made her invaluable for gathering information about other cadets. Her pale, floating form seemed fragile, but her mental powers could overwhelm most beings before they even realized they were under attack. She could read surface thoughts, project fear or confusion into enemy minds, and coordinate group tactics through direct mental communication. Thomag represented the industrial might of the Korthic Empire. His family controlled mining operations across 17 different star systems, and their wealth rivaled that of entire planets. The six-legged alien's multiple arms allowed him to operate complex machinery and weapon systems with an efficiency that amazed even advanced artificial intelligence programs. His tactical computer implants gave him access to real-time data about every aspect of any battle situation. This group had become known throughout the Academy as the Pinnacle, a name that perfectly captured their attitude toward themselves and everyone else. They occupied the best training times, received priority access to advanced simulation equipment, and were frequently selected for special assignments that would enhance their military records. Even the instructors treated them with obvious favoritism, though they maintained the pretense that all cadets were equal. The Pinnacle's influence extended far beyond their individual achievements. Other cadets from prestigious families naturally gravitated toward them, creating a network of connections that would serve them well throughout their military careers. They controlled social events, influenced academy policies through their family connections, and set the unofficial standards for what it meant to be successful at the most elite military school in the galaxy. Zorath had never experienced failure in any meaningful way. From childhood, he had been trained by the finest military minds his species could provide. Ancient Zentari combat techniques had been refined over thousands of years of warfare, and he had mastered them all before his 16th birthday. His physical capabilities were equally impressive, as he could lift nearly 2 tons without strain and move with surprising speed despite his massive frame. The daily combat rankings posted throughout the Academy consistently showed Zorath at the top of nearly every category. Individual combat, team tactics, strategic planning, weapon proficiency, and leadership evaluations all reflected his overwhelming superiority over other cadets. He had never lost a formal combat match, and his victories were usually so decisive that his opponents rarely lasted more than a few minutes. This pattern of constant success had shaped Zorath's worldview in fundamental ways. He genuinely believed that some beings were naturally superior to others, and that this superiority gave them both the right and the responsibility to lead. The Zentari had been among the founding species of the Galactic Alliance, and their contributions to galactic civilization were undeniable. They had brought order to chaos, established trade routes between distant worlds, and created the military structure that maintained peace across thousands of star systems. The presence of humans at the Academy puzzled and irritated Zorath in equal measure. These newcomers had contributed virtually nothing to galactic civilization, yet they were being granted the same opportunities as species with millennia of proven military tradition. Their technology was primitive, their physical capabilities were unremarkable, and their cultural achievements seemed insignificant when compared to the great civilizations that had shaped the galaxy. Zorath had observed the human cadets during training sessions and found them to be exactly what he expected from a primitive species. They struggled with advanced technology, lost most of their combat matches, and seemed completely overwhelmed by the complexity of galactic military strategy. The fact that Academy resources were being wasted on training these inferior beings struck him as both inefficient and unfair to more deserving candidates. The breaking point came during a routine team combat simulation that should have been easily predictable. The scenario involved capturing and defending a strategic position against a numerically superior force, a classic military problem that had been used at the Academy for decades. Standard tactical doctrine provided clear guidelines for how such situations should be handled, and Zorath expected to demonstrate the superiority of traditional Zentari military thinking. He had been paired with Kixara against two lesser cadets, including the human Jake Martinez and a Madani whose aquatic origins made him poorly suited for the terrestrial combat environment of the simulation. The outcome should have been determined before the exercise even began, given the obvious advantages that the Pinnacle possessed in both individual capability and team coordination, but the simulation did not unfold according to established patterns. The human cadet employed tactics that seemed to ignore conventional military wisdom, using the simulated environment in ways that the designers had never intended. Instead of following predictable defensive strategies, he created entirely new approaches that turned the scenario's assumptions upside down. His Madani partner, inspired by these unconventional methods, performed far above his expected capabilities. The final result was impossible to deny. The underdog team had achieved total victory through methods that existing tactical databases could not explain or counter. Zorath found himself staring at defeat statistics that should not have existed, watching as instructors reviewed the exercise recordings with expressions of confusion and interest. For the first time in his life, Zorath Velthara had been outmaneuvered by beings he considered fundamentally inferior. The crystalline structures along his spine glowed with barely contained rage as he realized that his perfect record had been shattered by a primitive human, who should not have possessed the knowledge or ability to challenge Zentari military superiority. This insult to his natural dominance would require a response that would restore the proper order of things and demonstrate the consequences of challenging one's betters. The Academy's main training arena buzzed with nervous energy as cadets gathered for the weekly combat assessments. These sessions happened every 7 days and served as both evaluation tools for instructors and entertainment for students who were not fighting. The circular arena was built into the heart of Nexus Prime Station, with energy barriers that could absorb massive amounts of damage while protecting spectators from stray weapons fire or debris. Jake Martinez sat quietly in the preparation room, checking his equipment one final time. The standard training gear felt familiar in his hands after months of practice, but today something felt different. Word had spread through the Academy that he would be facing Zorath Velthara in single combat, and the anticipation was unlike anything he had experienced since arriving at the station. Other cadets kept glancing at him with expressions that mixed curiosity with pity, as if they were looking at someone who had volunteered for an impossible task. The news of the match had traveled faster than Jake could have imagined. Within hours of the combat roster being posted, every cadet on the station seemed to know about the upcoming fight between the human newcomer and the Zentari noble. Betting pools had formed in every dormitory section, with odds heavily favoring Zorath. Some of the more creative gamblers were taking bets on how long Jake would last rather than whether he would win. With most estimates ranging from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, Jake tried to block out the noise and focus on what he had learned about Zentari combat techniques during his months at the Academy. Their four-armed fighting style was based on overwhelming opponents with coordinated attacks that came from multiple angles simultaneously. Their crystal shells provided natural armor that could deflect most energy weapons, and their compound eyes allowed them to track several targets at once while processing tactical information at superhuman speeds. In the equipment room, Jake selected his gear with careful consideration. The lightweight armor would protect him from serious injury while allowing full range of motion, something that would be crucial against an opponent with such obvious physical advantages. For weapons, he chose a single energy staff that could function as both a defensive tool and an offensive weapon. The staff was simpler than the advanced blade combinations that most elite cadets preferred, but Jake had spent countless hours learning to use it effectively. Meanwhile, Zorath was conducting his own preparations in the elite equipment section reserved for students from prominent families. His selection process was ceremonial and precise, each piece of gear chosen to demonstrate his superiority and heritage. The Zentari noble's armor was crafted from rare crystals that had been grown on his homeworld specifically for his use. The materials were not only more protective than standard equipment, but also served as symbols of his family's wealth and status. For weapons, Zorath selected a pair of energy blades that could extend to various lengths depending on the tactical situation. These advanced weapons allowed for both close-quarters combat and mid-range attacks, and their power output could be adjusted to deliver anything from stunning blows to lethal strikes. The blades hummed with contained energy as he activated them, their blue glow casting dancing shadows across the preparation room walls. The arena began filling with spectators as news of the unusual match spread throughout the station. Cadets from dozens of different species packed into the viewing galleries, their excited conversations creating a babel of languages that the universal translators struggled to process. Even instructors who were not scheduled to observe began filtering in, drawn by curiosity about this confrontation between such different types of fighters. Commander Veltar took his position as the official observer, his scarred crystal shell reflecting the arena's harsh lighting. He had overseen thousands of these matches during his long career at the Academy, but something about this particular fight felt significant. The confidence radiating from the Zentari noble was expected and familiar, but the human's calm demeanor suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of what he was about to face. The betting pools continued to grow as more spectators arrived. The odds against Jake ranged from 10-1 to as high as 50-1, depending on which group of cadets was organizing the gambling. Even his few supporters, mostly students from species that had also been dismissed by the Academy's elite, were placing only small bets and preparing for the inevitable disappointment. In the final minutes before the match began, both fighters entered the arena from opposite sides. The contrast between them was immediately obvious to everyone present. Zorath's crystalline form towered over Jake's more compact frame, and the Zentari's four arms created an intimidating display as he moved through his warm-up routine. His weapons gleamed with deadly purpose, and every movement demonstrated the perfect balance and control that came from years of elite training. Jake's entrance was notably more subdued. He moved with quiet efficiency, showing no sign of being intimidated by the growing crowd or his opponent's impressive display. His single weapon seemed almost pathetic compared to Zorath's advanced blade system, and his human physiology looked fragile next to the armored bulk of his opponent. To most observers, the upcoming fight appeared to be less of a contest than a demonstration of natural superiority. The energy barriers hummed to life around the arena as the final safety checks were completed. Medical teams took their positions at strategic points around the fighting area, their equipment ready to respond to serious injuries. The Academy's combat protocols were designed to prevent permanent damage, but accidents could still happen. When powerful weapons and skilled fighters were involved, Commander Veltar's voice echoed through the arena as he announced the standard rules that governed all Academy combat matches. The fight would continue until one combatant yielded or was incapacitated by their opponent. Medical intervention would be immediate if serious injury occurred, and the energy barriers would prevent any attacks from reaching the spectator areas. Both fighters acknowledged their understanding of these rules with formal gestures that had been used for centuries. As the two combatants faced each other across the arena floor, the atmosphere grew tense with anticipation. Zorath's stance was textbook perfect, a classical formation that had been refined over millennia of Zentari warfare. His four weapons created overlapping fields of defense while positioning him for immediate attack from multiple angles. His compound eyes tracked every micro-movement of his opponent while simultaneously calculating optimal striking patterns and escape routes. Jake's stance appeared almost casual by comparison. His feet were positioned for mobility rather than stability, and his single weapon was held in a neutral position that revealed nothing about his intended strategy. To most observers, he looked like he was simply waiting for the inevitable defeat that everyone expected. Only a few of the more experienced instructors noticed the subtle tension in his muscles and the way his eyes never left his opponent's center of mass. The moment stretched between them like a held breath, with hundreds of spectators waiting to see how quickly the natural order would be restored, and the upstart human would be put in his proper place. Commander Veltar raised his arm and the arena fell completely silent. Even the soft humming of the energy barriers seemed to fade as hundreds of spectators held their breath. The two fighters stood motionless, studying each other across the polished floor of the combat area. Zorath's crystal shell gleamed under the bright lights, while Jake appeared small and fragile in comparison. The moment stretched like a tight wire until the commander's arm dropped and his voice boomed through the arena with a single word that released all the tension at once. The match began with Zorath moving forward with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. His strategy was straightforward and had worked against every opponent he had ever faced. He would use his superior reach and multiple weapons to create a storm of attacks that would be impossible to defend against. Completely. His forearms moved with perfect coordination, each one controlling an energy blade that hummed with deadly power. Zorath's first attack came like lightning striking from a clear sky. His upper arms swung their blades in a crossing pattern aimed at Jake's head and shoulders, while his lower arms thrust forward to strike at the human's legs and torso. The attack was designed to force Jake into an impossible choice between protecting his upper body or his lower body, leaving him vulnerable to at least two devastating strikes. Jake's response was immediate and completely unexpected. Instead of trying to block the incoming weapons or retreat to gain distance, he moved forward and down. His body seemed to fold in on itself as he dropped into a crouch and rolled to his left, allowing all four energy blades to slice through the empty air, where he had been standing just moments before. The movement was so fluid and natural that it looked almost like dancing rather than combat. The crowd's surprised murmur was cut short as Jake's energy staff connected with the back of Zorath's left knee. The impact was not powerful enough to cause serious damage, but it sent a shock through the Zentari's nervous system that disrupted his balance and coordination. For a brief moment, the supposedly perfect warrior stumbled, and the spectators could see something they had never witnessed before. Zorath Velthara looking uncertain, the Zentari noble's recovery was swift and professional. His training took over automatically, and he used his superior size and reach to create distance while reassessing his opponent. The human's movement pattern did not match anything in his extensive database of combat techniques. This was not the rigid, predictable fighting style he had expected from a primitive species that had only recently learned to travel between stars. Zorath launched his second attack with more caution but equal determination. This time he created a web of strikes that should have been impossible for anyone to navigate without taking significant damage. His four weapons moved in carefully timed sequences, each blade following a precise path that would intersect with every possible escape route. The attack was a masterpiece of Zentari military science, refined over centuries of warfare and proven effective against every known combat style. Jake seemed to flow through the deadly pattern like water finding its way through cracks in stone. His body bent and twisted in ways that should not have been possible, avoiding strikes by margins so small that the energy fields of the weapons actually brushed against his armor without making solid contact. Each movement flowed seamlessly into the next, creating a continuous dance that kept him just out of reach of the flashing blades. The human's counterattacks were minimal but precisely placed. Each time Zorath committed to a particular strike pattern, Jake found tiny openings that allowed him to land quick hits with his energy staff. The impacts were not devastating, but they targeted pressure points and nerve clusters in Zentari, anatomy that should not have been known to someone from outside their species. Each successful hit disrupted Zorath's coordination slightly, making his next series of attacks just a little less perfect than the last. The arena's atmosphere shifted as the reality of the situation became clear to the watching spectators. This was not the expected demonstration of Zentari's superiority that everyone had come to see. The human was not just surviving against impossible odds, he was adapting to his opponent's techniques in real time, and finding weaknesses in what was supposed to be perfect combat form. Zorath's frustration grew with each failed attack sequence. His movements became more aggressive but less controlled as his confidence began to crack under the pressure of facing an opponent he could not understand or predict. The crystalline structures along his spine started to glow more brightly, a biological response to stress that was impossible for his species to hide. The Zentari noble changed his strategy, trying to use his superior strength and size to overwhelm the smaller human through brute force rather than finesse. He abandoned the elegant blade work he had been trained in since childhood and began swinging his weapons in wide, powerful arcs designed to crush rather than cut. The energy blades left glowing trails in the air as they swept through space fast. Enough to shatter stone, Jake's response to this new approach was to become even more mobile. He seemed to predict where each attack would land before Zorath had fully committed to the motion, moving away from danger zones with an ease that suggested he was reading his opponent's intentions rather than simply reacting to visible threats. His own attacks became more frequent and more precise, finding gaps in the Zentari's defenses that opened and closed in fractions of seconds. The crowd watched in growing amazement as the pattern of the fight became clear. Every time Zorath tried a new approach or technique, the human adapted to it within seconds and found ways to turn it against him. The supposedly primitive being was learning from each exchange and using that knowledge to make the next exchange more difficult for his opponent. Zorath's breathing became labored as the physical and mental strain of the fight began to take its toll. He had never faced an opponent who could match his endurance while simultaneously forcing him to work harder with each passing moment. His perfect technique was becoming sloppy as frustration and exhaustion clouded his judgment. The end came suddenly and with devastating finality. Zorath committed everything to one massive four-weapon combination attack that should have ended any fight immediately. All four of his energy blades converged on Jake's position from different angles, creating what appeared to be an inescapable death trap. The power levels of the weapons had been pushed to their maximum safe limits, and the air itself crackled with barely contained energy. Jake did not try to escape from the converging attack. Instead, he moved directly forward into the center of the energy pattern. His timing was perfect beyond human comprehension. His staff struck the exact point where all four weapons would meet, creating a harmonic resonance that disrupted the energy matrix holding the blades together. The feedback surge traveled back through the weapons faster than thought itself. Zorath's nervous system was overloaded by the returning energy, and his crystal shell actually cracked from the internal pressure. He crashed to the arena floor like a falling mountain, unconscious before his body finished hitting the ground. The entire sequence from the final attack to Zorath's defeat had taken less than 3 seconds. Jake stood quietly in the center of the arena, his energy staff powered down, showing no signs of celebration or triumph while medical teams rushed toward his fallen opponent. The silence in the arena stretched for what felt like hours but lasted only seconds. Hundreds of spectators stared in complete shock at the impossible scene before them. Zorath Velthara, the most elite warrior in the academy, lay unconscious on the floor while Jake Martinez stood calmly in the center of the fighting area. The medical teams rushed forward with their scanning equipment, confirming what everyone could see but no one could believe. The mighty Zentari was physically unharmed, but completely knocked out by feedback from his own weapons. Commander Veltar's announcement that the human had won seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the crowd. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Some spectators cheered in amazement, others sat in stunned silence, and a few began arguing loudly about what they had just witnessed. The Zentari cadets looked like their entire worldview had been shattered, while students from other species began reassessing everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. Jake walked quietly out of the arena without celebrating or making any grand gestures. He had won the fight, but he seemed to understand that something much larger than a simple combat match had just taken place. The other human cadets surrounded him as he left the fighting area, their faces showing a mixture of pride and concern about what this victory might mean for all of them. In the days that followed, the combat instructors began analyzing every second of the match recordings. They watched the fight from dozens of different angles, slowing down the action to study each movement and decision. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about combat theory and species capabilities. Jake had not simply gotten lucky or relied on primitive instincts to win his fight. Dr. Lisa Hendricks was a human physicist who had been assigned to the Academy as part of the cultural exchange program between Earth and the Galactic Alliance. She was the first person to understand what had really happened during the match. Her analysis revealed that Jake had demonstrated abilities that other species had completely overlooked because they did not fit into their existing understanding of how intelligence and combat skill worked. Dr. Hendricks explained her findings to a gathering of senior Academy instructors. Humans, she said, were products of an evolutionary environment unlike anything else in the known galaxy. Earth was a world of constant change and unpredictable challenges. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, and natural disasters had shaped human development for millions of years. Unlike species that had evolved in stable environments with predictable threats, humans had developed brains that were specifically designed to handle new and unexpected situations. The key difference was in how humans processed information during stressful situations. Most species relied on established patterns and proven techniques when faced with challenges. They had evolved to perfect specific responses to specific threats, creating incredibly efficient but somewhat rigid approaches to problem-solving. Humans had evolved differently, developing the ability to rapidly combine different types of information and create entirely new solutions under pressure. Jake's victory was not the result of superior physical abilities or advanced training techniques. Instead, it demonstrated a uniquely human trait that had been millions of years in the making. During the fight, his brain had been rapidly analyzing Zorath's attack patterns, identifying weaknesses in real time, and developing countermeasures that had never been used before. This process happened so quickly that even Jake himself was not fully aware of how he was doing it. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Galactic Military Academy and beyond. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive newcomers began to realize that they had completely misunderstood what they were dealing with. Military strategists across the galaxy started to recognize that human troops might represent a significant advantage in conflicts against opponents who relied on traditional and predictable approaches to warfare. News of the fight spread throughout the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. The story of a human cadet defeating the most elite alien warrior in seconds became the subject of countless discussions in military academies, government councils, and civilian gathering places on thousands of different worlds. Some species viewed the development with interest and respect, while others felt threatened by the implications of human adaptive capabilities. For Jake, the victory brought both opportunities and challenges that he had never anticipated. Researchers from dozens of different species wanted to study his brain patterns and reflexes. Military leaders offered him positions in elite units that had previously been closed to humans. Academy instructors began incorporating elements of human training methods into their standard curriculum, trying to teach other species how to think more flexibly during combat situations. The social dynamics at the Academy changed dramatically. In the weeks following the fight, students who had previously ignored or dismissed the human cadets began approaching them with genuine curiosity and respect. The rigid hierarchy that had placed certain species at the top of the social order started to crack as everyone realized that superiority could not be measured using traditional standards. Alone, Zorath's recovery from the neural feedback was complete within a few days, but his worldview required much longer to heal. The defeat had forced him to confront the possibility that his entire understanding of strength and superiority might be fundamentally flawed. His initial anger and humiliation gradually transformed into something more complex, a grudging respect for capabilities he had never imagined possible. The Zentari Noble began studying human history and culture with the same intensity he had once devoted to perfecting his combat techniques. What he discovered surprised him even more than his defeat had. Humans were not primitive savages who had stumbled onto galactic civilization by accident. They were survivors who had endured challenges that would have destroyed most other species, and their apparent weaknesses were actually adaptations that had allowed them to thrive in an impossibly difficult environment. The incident marked a fundamental shift in how the galactic community viewed humanity. No longer were humans seen as junior partners who needed protection and guidance from more advanced civilizations. Instead, they were recognized as bringing unique and valuable capabilities to the Alliance that could benefit all member species. The lesson learned that day echoed through military academies across the galaxy. Never underestimate a species based on first impressions, because evolution creates warriors in many different forms. Jake graduated from the academy with honors, and went on to serve in elite units that had previously been dominated by other species. His success opened doors for other humans and helped establish Earth as an equal partner in galactic affairs. But more importantly, he had proven that strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest warriors are often those who can adapt to any challenge the universe throws at them. The story of the human cadet, who defeated an alien elite in seconds, became legend throughout the galaxy. It served as a reminder that in a universe full of unknown threats and endless possibilities, the ability to adapt and overcome might be the most valuable trait any species could possess.